Okay, I guess we're going to get started for the afternoon. My name is Linda Reinhardt. I am a trauma CNS and program manager for Grandview Health, a newer level 2 trauma center in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. And I'm also the immediate past president for STN, the Society of Trauma Nurses. And I did want to just thank Ashley and the folks with Center and Dr. LaGrone for inviting me back again this year. I know that I can speak for Leanne, our current STN president, John, and the rest of our STN board when I say that we truly value our partnerships and collaborations that we have with all of our organizations that are represented here today and beyond. And we certainly hope that our partnerships will continue to strengthen. As trauma nurses, we truly appreciate having a seat at the table with such important work. So thank you. It is my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Ashley Farley. Ashley was with us last year, and we are pleased to have her back. She is joining us virtually. Ashley is a program officer for knowledge and research services at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ashley spearheads the implementation of the foundation's open access policy and associated initiatives. At the forefront of innovation, she leads the Gates Open Research, a groundbreaking, transparent publishing platform. Ashley's commitment to open access stems from a belief that freely accessible knowledge has the transformative power to improve and save lives. She's speaking to us today on Research into Practice, Patients and Providers Taking Back the Power. So please help me welcome Ashley Farley.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the wonderful introduction. Can everyone see my slides and hear me? I will assume so until someone, great, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks. I'm so happy to be joining you today. I will very kind of broadly talk about patients and providers taking back the power. I think there are large and small ways that this can be accomplished. It's just a little bit more about myself. So I am a librarian. That really does inform my perspective on this work. I really believe that access to information is a human right. I've been advocating for change and knowledge dissemination for over a decade now. I'm a white woman working in a very privileged institution in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And when I'm not advocating for open access, I like to throw around weights and pretend that I enjoy cardio. So this year is a big year for the Gates Foundation for many, many reasons. It's a very interesting time to be doing this work. We have a policy update that's just gone into effect, and it's been a big, but I think important shift for the foundation. And when I think about taking back power, I think policy is a really powerful tool. I think that taking bold steps, if you're able to, is really important and it can help empower others to do the same. We've taken a long look at the past decade of our open access policy and evaluated if it's helping us achieve what we're hoping to achieve. And we made adjustments accordingly. So, overall in the past decade of the open access movement, we have seen a lot of progress and difference, and the topic has become kind of in the forefront of a lot of different conversations, which is really important. But we've also seen kind of more, especially commercial publishers taking over kind of the open access movement and really having a stronghold over the dissemination of knowledge. We've seen the article processing charges or open access fees continue to become more and more expensive. We've seen the community come out and say that the process we have right now, and especially the financial models, are not equitable. And we've kind of turned a situation where we're hoping to, have people be able to access and consume information more openly and freely, to now being unable to afford participating or publishing in that. So we shifted our policy to require a preprint. So we're not the only funder to have a preprint policy, but the first one to pivot away from requiring that the journal version of record be made open access. And I think that our kind of reliance on making the journal version of record open access and giving that like too much power and it's coming at a very high cost for open access. Preprints have taken off over the pandemic, especially in global health. They're free to read, they're free to post, they're very cost effective. And what I like as well is that they're very they're journal agnostic, so the research can really be evaluated on its own, and that's as part of our larger journey in uh, really shifting the career incentive system. We know it's very important for our grantees, and it's been a hard process to try and change. But it's something that we feel is important. We can start to signal that, things like impact factor are not the only metric we're using to evaluate our grantees. So trying to help really shift the narrative and lessen the reliance on prestige and privilege in publishing to one that's accessible to all. We launched our own kind of preprint server to join some of the many out there that are used, but has a little bit more validation and checks. And we're doing some cool things to see, how can we build that trust around preprints? Because that's definitely something that comes up often. If this is happening before the traditional peer review journal process, what does that mean? And more on that. So I've been, especially at the beginning of this year, kind of embracing when I think about taking back power is kind of questioning everything. Just because something's been done a certain way does not mean it shouldn't or can't change. I think that's something that I'm encouraging, especially our partners and grantees around knowledge dissemination is questioning why something is the way it is and why it can't work. Always kind of interrogating who benefits the most. And this often shows who has the most power. And often there are lots of power imbalances in this space. So it's been interesting working a lot with societies lately. They might not know, that the journal within the society is maybe owned by a larger commercial publisher, or how kind of the financial aspects of that work. And so I've been encouraging a lot of our partners to really ask like who's getting the most. If you are in a position of power, it'd be great to use it for good and not to ignore persistent issues. And this was it really inspired a lot of the conversations I've had lately with researchers around our policy changes of, yes, we know that the system isn't working well. We know that career advancement needs to change, but they don't want to be the leaders in that change. And so it kind of, we just end up cycling through with early career researchers and, newer um, people in their careers are being forced to kind of perpetrate the system that we know was broken without taking any strong steps to try to change it. I also think in the topic of power and especially patience, I know a lot of really fantastic patients and patient advocacy groups that I think within their own right have become experts, but they can often kind of get shut out of the process of research or research dissemination if they maybe don't have the same credentials. And so I think we really should, question what does expert mean, who gets to participate in knowledge creation and dissemination, who really defines that. I have a couple interesting examples here that I wanted to share. So when we think about how we use and spend our time, there's an interesting paper that came out a few years ago that talks about $1 billion donation. So estimating the cost of researchers' time spent on peer review, which is given at no cost to the publishers. And so this paper kind of explored like what is that cost if we actually paid peer reviewers. So I think that's interesting when we volunteer or agree to do things, like who benefits from that the most. And then you might have seen this recently. This is something I think is very concerning and a bit scary when we have such a traditional journal and knowledge dissemination system, and saying that like it has to be done that way or it's not considered um, correct or quality or trustworthy. But now we're seeing with the new administration and kind of this new journal that was created is that they're using kind of the playbooks we set and weaponizing it. And I think that's very concerning and something to keep an eye on. So as we're trying to change the system, I think it needs to be a bit more flexible. around what counts. Empower others. I think these are kind of more the small steps. So if you read and post and cite preprints, that'll normalize it. It'll empower others do the same. Same with any other kind of different ways of sharing information. Be willing to talk about the issues and equities. And I think that's been one of the strengths of the open access movement and trying to change academic publishing is that there are people that are more willing to kind of boldly come out and say, this isn't an equitable system. This isn't working well, which can be a hard thing to do when certain publication venues, authors rely on that for their career advancement. I think definitely value people's time and money. So coming to the value of people's time, that's kind of the peer review given and the editorial time that it takes, and then the different perspectives. And then really supporting groups and platforms that are driving that change that we want to see. I think there are a lot of strong examples out there that often get overlooked because they don't fit into that more traditional mode. You may have seen, and I think this is a very interesting kind of example to follow of kind of that boldness of talking about the issues and inequities, is a few scientists have produced a lawsuit, an antitrust litigation for the top 5 academic publishers. We could talk, about length about whether or not the arguments in there are really sounded great, but I think it was a really strong example of putting those on paper and kind of the desperation that many feel being stuck in this current system. I talked a lot about, the inflexibility of being able to submit to multiple journals at once, the slowness of dissemination, and then the burden of peer review upon researchers. No update since the end of the year, but definitely something to keep a watch for. And I did want to shout out, this was a journal I learned about last year being involved in this group, the Journal of Global Surgery. I think it's a really intriguing, different model, trying to find a more fair, sustainable, open access model. And I think it's really taken off, which is not easy for a new or different journal to do. So that's really exciting. And I think it shows that this community really wants to see lasting and sustainable change. And this is an exemplar example of that. And then I thought another really interesting example to include. So this is kind of a phenomenon that's been building in the last couple of years, and I think is really taking off now. If you don't follow Retraction Watch, I highly recommend it. It's fascinating to see the things that they covered. And this is the Retraction Watch resignation list. So societies are really starting to stand up and take kind of control over journals and switching away from kind of commercially run platforms to those that are community owned as a way to support open access, because we're seeing again like a lot of encroachment. They're taking back the power from the commercial publishers that just want to see, more and more articles and money being made that's not necessarily best for the society or for the journal. So it's something to keep an eye on, and some of the work that we're doing moving forward is seeing how can we better support societies that want to make that transition to a more equitable OA business model and make that happen. And I will stop there, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions, so feel free to ask me anything.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We'll open it up if we can have somebody monitoring the chat, and anyone in the room a question for Ashley? Go ahead. Thank you, LJ.
Thank you. This is a more big picture question. What is the future of the AI librarian?
Oh,
How, how will librarians once again? I mean, Dewey Decimal was the definition of my childhood, right? It meant a lot. But you all, and whatever it's going to become, has a whole new dynamic power. How can you help us navigate it? And how are you thinking about what it means to be an AI librarian?
I love that question. Thank you. I will try to answer this in a very optimistic way. I mean, I do think AI will help us leverage tools, and we've been in information overload for I think quite some time now, and that's never really been addressed. There's more and more papers, information, the amount of data being produced, like a human cannot keep up with that. So I think that's where leveraging AI could really be beneficial. And I always see librarians as the kind of friendly guide into, the information world and journey. And I think that'll always be necessary. And especially, I think librarians are really important in helping people assess what is real and quality, however that's defined, information and sources. And I think that's always becoming a more and more persistent problem, especially trying to tell what's been generated by AI. I think we'll always need kind of a human component there, but we're not best positioned for that yet. I'm hoping we will work towards it. I think libraries right now are under a lot of different threats, especially in the public librarian space, but even, in institutions, budgets are getting smaller. There's some recent discussion actually today. Clarivate, one of the larger commercial kind of knowledge entities, decided now that libraries don't technically own any back access to anything, even they pay a subscription. So we're seeing those policies change more and more, where you don't actually own access to anything in a digital age, which I think is a bit terrifying. And libraries are speaking up against that. Libraries, especially during the pandemic, took some really bold steps of if you followed anything about like the Internet Archive lawsuit, like trying to retain digital copies themselves of things, because that could disappear quite quickly. And so I think librarians will still play a really important role in trying to protect access to that information, no matter kind of the shape that AI takes. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ashley. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.